Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us tonight on The Review. I have with me Reza Rumi in our Lahore studios. I have Mr. Noorani and Mr. Reza Ali Abdi in our Karachi studios, and we're talking about The Coffee House of Lahore, a memoir written by K.K. Aziz. Now, Reza, let me come to you. Tell me a bit about how K.K. Aziz wrote, because you've actually read his other historical narratives, and you also mentioned earlier, whilst we were talking, that he fell out of favor with not only the establishment but also the government because of his dissenting views. What sort of style did he adopt when he wrote? I mean, he was a historian, so was it very typical analysis, or was it what many critics have said? He just went for the truth.
Yes, that's true. I mean, he was, his writing is quite direct, and that's one of the hallmarks of his various books, that he says what he has to say. I mean, his early books are, of course, much more authored in a different style, and they are more, they're mellower, softer. But as with the passage of time, he had acquired this style of being direct, and that's why, as somebody said earlier, that this book, Coffee House of Lahore, is a departure from that trend, because here he's very personal, he's very emotional, he talks about crying and about nostalgia. So I think there's a transition back and forth. His style evolved with the passage of time. But I think if we were to summarize what he has exposed in his books, is the fact that the Pakistani state after 1947, actually one of the key tasks it had was to justify the existence of a nation state, rewrite the whole history, and that project still continues.
Let me quote before you start. He writes here in a chapter called The Setting, in the beginning of this book. He says, soon the club, and by the club I'm sure he means the members who came to the coffee house, grew in numbers and in the quality of its customers. Chirag Hassan Hazrat is said to have been the pioneer, and he brought in his friends and colleagues, and gradually it had a glittering membership. And it surely does have a glittering membership, because it's what he has a roll call. He divides this book in roll call number 1, 2, 3, and what he means to do is he's discussing biographies of these men who went to the coffee house. And to me, as a woman and a reader, it's almost like there are no women there, and there are only this huge list of men who are phenomenal achievers, who have been phenomenal achievers.
Yes, I think, you are absolutely right. He mentions a list of 206 eminent persons who were, regular visitors to the Lahore's coffee house, and of course most of them, in fact all of them, are men. But that is a function of our cultural the way our society was 5 or 6 decades ago. Of course, it's changing now. But if you look at the galaxy of the people who visited, the list is amazing. From Sayyid Sibte Hassan to Zahir Kashmiri to Safdar Mir, and you name it, all the great writers, intellectuals, poets, and artists have been members of the coffee house. And I think the point on Park Tea House is that the coffee house was actually a colonial institution which continued after the creation of Pakistan, and by 1970 it was closed. I think Park Tea House acquired a life of its own, and a much more purely a different focus, and it also evolved as a very major institution in our cultural landscape. But I think the coffee house was a testament to the composite culture of Lahore. Lahore, if you remember, by 1920s had become a very major cultural center of northern India. The number of educational institutes, the kind of composite mix of population that was there. So you had Khushwant Singh here, you had Amrita Shergill, the great painter, living in Lahore, and coffee house was actually a symbol of this composite culture that Lahore had, and which was severed in 1947 to be replaced by a more mono-Pakistani Muslim culture.
Let me bring you in, Reza Abdi and Mr. Noorani. Now, once again, I'm going to read from a chapter, The Roll of Honor, number 5. It says, interestingly here, more cups of coffee are ordered. If we're in pocket, we indulge in the treat of a plate full of cashew nuts. Friends arrive and the circle around the table widens. Our favorite perch is the table at the left-hand window, which offers a vantage point from where we can see through. So very interesting and detailed explanations, almost to the point that sometimes he also says that those visitors who came in didn't have enough money to order, but they came in for the conversation. Mr. Abdi, what are your recollections?
I remember it is Karachi's coffee house, which I remember being a Karachiite. We know some of the authors or intellectuals who didn't have much money in their pocket.
Sadly, yes.
And that was the best place to go, because the newcomers or the new people entering the coffee house used to offer a round of coffee or snacks to all of them. So the people who didn't have money could sit there all day long and have many cups of tea or tea.
If I may come in, yes, I may mention a sparkling conversationalist whose name will not be revealed. He died recently. He was a sparkling conversationalist. He was a penniless person. And yet, there were people clamoring for him. They wanted him to come and sit on the table.
That's right.
And he didn't spend anything. He didn't have anything. And the person who entertained him was extremely grateful to
That's exactly what K.K. Aziz writes about in this book. And once again, it's interesting for our viewers because I mean they would get a glimpse into what this book is all about. He writes, "It's time to go home. The bill is called for. Sometimes Waheed is short by an anna and I make my contribution to a good cause." So let's go on to talk about how important a mark, as Raza was also explaining, the coffee house of Lahore made predominantly on not only the culture but the whole socio-political fabric, and we don't find these coffee houses anymore. In Karachi they're absent, in Lahore they're not there anymore. Was it only politics that perhaps of the day that came under discussion?
Lahore, Halqa Arbab-e-Zawq, a movement was initiated in this place called Coffee House. It moved to YMCA later on, but it went on and changed the entire trend of the Urdu literature, and
the progressive writers movement
against them. And it was a parallel movement which was very active, very prominent, and made a big difference. And you could see it in the in our fiction, that how the trends changed, and it all came out from this coffee house. Can you imagine?
We'll take a very short break. We'll be right back. Do stay with us. We're discussing The Coffee House of Lahore by K.K. Aziz.